Today, we're going to be doing the usual thing. We're going to be cutting through the noise and learning something along the way and doing our best to understand what the truth of the situation is. Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Chris Martinson here with your update on SARS-CoV-2, a.k.a. the honey badger virus, calling this one whipping the fog. By the way, thanks, everybody who gave me well wishes about the tooth situation. It's a thing. It's a situation. So I will be dealing with that for a while, and for everybody who's dealt with tooth stuff, there's no good tooth stories out there. So I got one of those, standard, regular old tooth story. Okay, I really like this quote that I got from Art Berman, my good friend and often contributor here at Peak Prosperity. He says, this George Eliot quote, "It was as useless to fight against the interpretations of ignorance as to whip the fog." Well, today, folks, we're going to whip the fog. Or we're going to fight against the interpretations of ignorance. And by the way, I'm going to start here, and I'm going to organize this around a tweet that came out. And I think a well-meaning doctor who is really, maybe their heart is in the best place, but I didn't like their approach at all. And it's this. It was Fahim Yunus here tweeted out, "Which medicine prevents COVID-19?" So a straw man argument, prevents. That's an odd word for a medical doctor to use because very few things prevent anything. They're in the business of treatment. So understanding that he may have been using clever phrasing here, and I may be misinterpreting this badly, goes down this list and says, which medicine prevents COVID-19, and puts a list of things here which include hydroxychloroquine, in quotes, an immunity booster, blood thinners, Zithromax, Ivermectin, remdesivir, vitamin C, Actemra, aspirin, plasma, bleach, zinc. Answer, he says, none of the above. Wear a mask, wash hands, avoid crowds. Don't crave fancy solutions to simple problems. All right, the reason I took exception to this is because seeing bleach in a same list there with hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin and vitamin C and stuff like that, okay, as well as blood thinners. So we're going to take this list apart because what I think this list does is it damns by faint association, and it sort of sets this whole thing up, which basically says, listen, folks, really nothing you can do about this except to, remain socially isolated and wait for a vaccine or something like that. A very medical sort of an approach. And by the way, I'm not sure that we can put some things on here and say that they don't prevent COVID, because we know that some people are exposed to the virus, test positive for the virus, and never have any symptoms whatsoever and don't seem to have any lasting health effects. So somehow those people, for whatever reason, something in their body prevented COVID. So not catching SARS-CoV-2, the virus, not amplifying that in your body because we can detect it, but COVID, the disease. There's lots of things that prevent people apparently from getting the disease of COVID. All right. So let's go down this list. First thing up on that list, hydroxychloroquine, of course, we'll start there. You know what's interesting? We have this gentleman here. A lot of you follow him as well. And Dr. John, he finally did an episode on August 27th on hydroxychloroquine. And I took this screenshot from the moment he waded in, and he did a really nice job, and it was very balanced, and he went to great pains to say he understands this is controversial, and if you don't want to listen, that's fine, and very, very polite. And then he's comparing, as a person with medical background, right? He's comparing what happened in the UK recovery trial, where they gave toxic doses, and he couldn't believe what he was reading when he finally looked at those studies and dove in. He said, oh my gosh, the standard of care for hydroxychloroquine is anywhere from 200 to 400 milligrams per day. And if you really wanted to push that, you might go to 800 milligrams that first day. But in the recovery trial in the UK, where not only did they give toxic level of dosing, but they gave it really late to patients who were already in the hospital, who were already deep into their symptoms at times when it really wasn't going to work. So these are ill people, and then they gave a toxic dose of something to them, which is malpractice at the best. It's something more malignant than that at worst, because they were playing with people's lives potentially to make a point, which they really wanted to prove, which is that hydroxychloroquine doesn't work and maybe is even dangerous. What would you say if you found out that your doctor, in order to make a point, be it a political point or a dollar-based point because, they're paid by a pharma company and that's where their allegiances lay, if they did something to you that would harm you, if not kill you, on purpose, I don't know where to place that besides, malignant is the kindest word I could put on that. But at any rate, this is the face Dr. John Campbell makes at the moment when he's sort of reviewing the fact that in the recovery trial, they put the patients on 2,400 milligrams of hydroxychloroquine in the first 24 hours, right? Not over the whole course, but 800 milligrams, another 800 milligrams, and then another 800 milligrams. It's just like this. Oh my God, it's unbelievable toxic dosing, right? And that's the face. He's just very confused by it because there is no proper explanation for others. There's no way to sort of say, well, I suppose they were trying to see what the high range of this dose would be. No, they were giving a toxic level of dosing. So at any rate, what did he find? Well, he went through the studies, and some of them we gone through, and one he went through yesterday, same one I went through on Tuesday, is the Belgium study, where it was a retrospective study, 8,045 patients, so well-powered. And they said, wow, this stuff works. It cuts, the hazard ratio was hanging out at like 0.62 from memory, or 0.68, something like that. At any rate, at least a 30-some% improvement in mortality. So that's what he found in that data, and he was very confused by both the WHO trials and the UK recovery trials, both of which were using toxic levels of doses, or it's at least what we would call exceedingly high doses. Also administered late and without zinc and azithromycin. So for sure we have that, and this was the trial that we looked at, 8,075, that was it. And that was the Belgium study, which we looked at on Tuesday, which Dr. John Campbell also looked at. And as well, there was another one that's come out recently, this from August 25th here, which was use of hydroxychloroquine in hospitalized COVID-19 patients is associated with reduced mortality, findings from the observational multi-center Italian CHORIST study. And so what did they do there? Well, 3,451, so very well powered. That's a lot. Unselected patients hospitalized in 33 clinical centers in Italy from February through May. Laboratory confirmed SARS-CoV-2 infection. These were all analyzed. And the primary endpoint in a time to event analysis was in-hospital death, comparing patients who received HCQ with patients who did not. So, and this explains the analysis that they did. So results. So out of these 3,451 patients, 76.3% received HCQ, and death rates, which were per 1,000 person days. So a person day in a hospital is what they were looking at here. For patients receiving or not HCQ, were 8.9 and 15.7 respectively. So, Nelly, 8.9 death rate here for HCQ, 15.7. So very serious reduction in mortality. I think they were being very reduced mortality is a very understated way of putting that. That's a big reduction right there. So after adjustment for propensity scores, they found a 30% lower risk of death in patients receiving HCQ. And then secondary analyses yielded similar results. So that's the conclusion. HCQ, hydroxychloroquine, associated with a 30% lower risk of death in COVID-19 hospitalized patients. All right, and as I dug deeper into the study, again, it's given kind of late, so these are hospitalized patients. I couldn't find any direct mention of blood levels measured for zinc or azithromycin. There's stuff in there, a few people were on it, but it wasn't part of the study, right? So we still don't know yet what happens when you give hydroxychloroquine early with zinc and azithromycin, except in a lot of the observational studies that are coming out of doctors. Dr. Zelenko, all the doctors out of LA and Texas. There's doctors all over the US. You've got Didier Raoult. You've got doctors in Brazil. You've got doctors all over the world who are delivering the triple therapy combo of hydroxychloroquine, zinc, azithromycin, and reporting outstanding results from that. So there's a strong enough signal in that that's why I went out on a limb a long time ago and said, this looks real to me. And in particular, I really admired the reasoning of both Dr. Zelenko and Didier Raoult, who said, listen, we understand you all want this randomized placebo-controlled trial, but we feel it's unethical to withhold from people a treatment that we know is beneficial. And I think they've got a strong argument to make for that. And by the way, this whole idea that you can't possibly move forward without a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial is actually false, particularly in that situation where I just told you about where there's already a benefit. right? It would be unethical, actually, to withhold that benefit from other people. In fact, there are drug trials that are set up such that if a strong enough signal comes through early on, they crash the study open, they break the seal, they break the randomization of it, they peer into the data because they want to start giving this drug to everybody right away. So it can happen. And by the way, if you told me that you had something that was going to cut the risk of death by 30%, I would say break the seal on that trial, even if it was randomized controlled, and let's get in there and start giving this to everybody. All right, and thanks to Chuck in Belize. This is posted at our website on August 26th. Not in time yet. So not in time to make it into Thursdays, but luckily it made it into today's for me. And it was this one. I hadn't seen this one. This is all the way from April 21st. So thanks, Chuck, to bring that to my attention. Countries which primarily use antimalarial drugs as COVID-19 treatments see slower dynamic of daily deaths. Interesting study. It's just going in and just asking the question of countries that did use antimalarial drugs, in this case hydroxychloroquine, principally. What was their experience? And so what they were looking at was, they said, okay, from the time when you first started recording COVID deaths in this country, what do the shapes of the death curves look like? And they look like this, right? So this is found way back in April. So days after the third death being recorded as the time when they would start gathering the data. So they have the third death, and then boom, just keep recording it. So you'd see they went from here. This is the number third death, and this is daily deaths, very, very, very low. And you can see what's happening here. The number of daily deaths in the countries here, which is the control group, which are countries that are not using antimalarial drugs. The blue line is antimalarial drugs. This is a very powerful signal right here. That's a very big gap right there. It's statistically significant, very statistically significant. So this data alone back in April would have said, hey, you know what? Maybe we ought to be using this stuff. Way back here on April 21st, right? Indeed, actually, remember way back here from April 27th, this is a slide from my April 27th update. Right here, this is coming to us from a New York Times article on April 1st, right? Says, it's not an April Fool's drug post here, it's an actual real thing. They said here the malaria drug helped to speed the recovery of a small number of patients. China reported this week. That's when we started to pick up on this data and say, hey, this is a thing. It's going to send a ripple of excitement out through the treating community, says Dr. William Schaffner, an infectious disease expert at Vanderbilt. And it should have, because we were getting data like this, because it was actually working. And this is before Trump came out and said, oh, I think I like this stuff. That's when the New York Times went the other direction, said, oh, this stuff doesn't work. But look how they were treating it back here back on April 1st, right? So this is pretty interesting, isn't it? Just that change in tone, right? It's going to send a ripple of excitement out through the treating community. Well, it really should have. It ought to have. And it didn't. And that was for political reasons, and also because I think pharma companies got their money into the situation, and they really, really, really didn't want an off-patent medication to be as effective as hydroxychloroquine seems to be. And in fact, when we start adding up all the different hydroxychloroquine trials out there, this comes again from COVID-19 Crusher here, they've put together a list which shows the relative risk that's risk reduction in death, so in mortality. So this they saw 17.8% deaths here in this study out of Paris with 4,415 patients, and 21.9 with non-HCQ, so relative risk percentage reduction of 18.7%. This study very, very late. These are awful sort of numbers of levels of death up here. even 18, that's nothing to write home about. We've got this one here with a 34% reduction, 36.9, 47% reduction, 48.9, 49% reduction here out of this 9,600 person patient study. Look at that, 14.7% chance of death compared to 29.2. And then standing out all alone on its own, being complete wankers about the whole thing, the recovery trial out of the UK, they actually recorded an increase in deaths because they were giving toxic doses. Toxic. That's not Texan, that's toxic doses. Awful. Just embarrassing. I mean, really shoddy. I mean, just horrific. And that study is one of the most cited studies I see when I got another study I'll show you. I didn't get it into today's presentation, but it's another big study that came out, and it was presented on World News at Reddit and other places that this puts the stake in the idea that, hydroxychloroquine has any benefit at all. And what they did was they looked at a bunch of studies and condensed them all into one spot, but they only picked 26 studies out of hundreds they could have. One of them, of course, was the recovery trial. So they put this dog of a trial into the mix and go, based on studying the studies, we've just determined that it doesn't do any good. So in the good doctors list, I think we're just going to have to put a big red line through hydroxychloroquine because that actually works. That's actually helpful. And then he goes on to say immunity boosters in the air quotes, like, yeah, oh my God, we're talking hippie woo-hoo stuff here. Oh no, you're going to boost your immunity, man. Actually, we do know that vitamin D does help the body fight the coronavirus. We reported on this. A major Israeli study came out, and there's a link to it right there. And of course, I take the time to put all the links to all of my materials sourced down below in the description below this video. So if you want to, you can chase it down. That way, you can verify if I'm being on the up and up or just satisfy your curiosity to go deeper. But that's part of the service I'm providing here. At any rate, good study, thousands of people. They discovered in this that people who had vitamin D levels in the blood that were above or higher than 21 nanograms per mil generally were either asymptomatic or very mildly symptomatic. If you were between 21 nanograms and 17 nanograms, that's when people had more serious cases. Those would be moderate to severe cases. And then people of COVID, and then people who had levels of vitamin D in the blood below 17 nanograms per mil, below that, they would have the most serious cases and they would be the most severely impacted. So yes, this immunity booster does a great job. Really important, okay? It is possible to use immunity boosters, and I believe to actually prevent COVID, okay? If it turns out you have enough vitamin D in there, you're asymptomatic throughout the entire course of your dealing with the SARS-CoV-2 virus replication cycle. If you're totally asymptomatic, I'd call that prevents COVID, because COVID is the disease. It doesn't prevent you from catching SARS. You might still catch that. It might still replicate, but you don't get the disease. That's called prevent. That's what vitamin D does. So I think you got that one dead wrong. And by the way, he's not alone. You know who else is in there with him? Oh, Canada. Look at this. This comes to us from the dietitians of Canada, right? Please, so here they are trying to debunk fake news, right? Thanks, dietitians. What do you got for us? Please follow the advice of public health officials. They plead here. Advice for the public on COVID-19. Here it is. You cannot boost your immune system through diet. What? Of course you can. What are you talking about? You can't boost your immune system through diet. What are you talking about, Canadian dietitians? Hang on here. This took me 0.08 of a second to actually Google this up. Check this out. Poor diet, malnutrition, or a diet lacking in one or more nutrients can impair the production and activity of immune cells and antibodies. Oh, wouldn't you know that? I would guess that somehow diet and your immune system are connected. After all, of course it is. It's really, really well known. In fact, it goes a lot further than that. In fact, there's a huge body of work on diet and immune function. This is a gigantic analysis of all the bodies of work that are out there. So this is a really interesting article out here that came out in August 2019. And it goes further than that. And of course, your immune system is affected by diet. Yes, also stress and exercise. This comes to us from Cleveland Clinic back in 2018. So yes, you can boost your immune system through diet. In fact, everybody knows that, except the dietitians of Canada, I guess. I don't know. That's the kind of stuff. We're whipping the fog on this one. That's what we're doing now. So we're going to have to put a red line through immunity booster because it turns out you can boost your immunity in ways that actually prevent COVID, the disease, looks like. So let's go on with that. Blood thinners is next on the list. And of course, we've covered that with the MATH plus treatment protocol. What is MATH? MATH is M-methylprednisone. We've got ascorbic acid, which is vitamin C. That's the A. We've got heparin and thiamine, the T and the H. Heparin is a blood thinner, and as well zinc and vitamin D. So this is the MATH plus. This is plus these things down here. But the biggies would have been the methylprednisone, the heparin, and also intravenous ascorbic acid or vitamin C. That gets it into the blood very, very quickly, and it does a great job mopping up the oxidants that are out there that are the damaging byproducts of an overdone cytokine storm. vitamin C plays a big role in that, and there's actually quite a few studies around that that show that. I'll get to one of those in just a second. So what are we going to do to the good doctor's list? Well, we're going to have to put a big red line through blood thinners because that's what heparin is, and heparin actually works to help limit the progression of COVID and make it not quite as bad. Does it prevent it? No, it doesn't prevent it because, of course, you're on the Math Plus protocol because you already have COVID. But I think it's wrong to imply that blood thinners play no role in COVID, which is sort of what's implied here. But I guess in a very, very strict legal sense, he can say, I was using the word prevent very carefully. But I still think that the wrong impression is given out in this particular list because of the way it's structured and all of that. So maybe clumsily done, but I got to fight the ignorance that results if you took it at face value. All right, so Zithromax, we've already covered that Zithromax has a very strong signal when it's combined with hydroxychloroquine. No need to beat that one any further. Ivermectin, lots and lots of studies. Here's one I don't think I've presented yet. This came out on 6/5/2020, and the use of ivermectin was associated with lower mortality in hospitalized patients, so this is already a little late in the game, but ivermectin seems to have a slightly different mechanism of action that's pretty helpful. I'm going to try and connect that mechanism of action with a really cool thing we just learned today, but I got to hunt it down to learn more before I can present it, about the impact of COVID on heart cells. Pretty strong stuff, especially what it's doing to the nuclei of those particular cells. And there's a role, of course, ivermectin works by blocking the import of certain proteins into the nucleus. We'll tell that story in a day or next time. All right. So what did they find here? They found lower mortality in the ivermectin group. It was 15% versus 25%. So they got that OR of 0.52. Really good. Mortality was also lower among 75 patients already with severe pulmonary disease who were treated with ivermectin. So that was 38.8%. That's not a great mortality. But again, this is severe pulmonary disease, okay? And that's severe pulmonary disease. And but 38.8% ain't great, but it's much better than 80.7%. Look at that. OR of 0.15. P-value of 0.001, highly, highly significant. But they found there was no significant difference in successful extubation rates, 36.1 versus 15.4%, and the OR is actually higher in this regard, 3.11. P-value, not statistically significant in this study, so we would need more patients to find out if that was a true signal or not. But after adjustment for between group differences and mortality risks, the overall mortality difference remains significant, with a OR of 0.27. So it's got it was associated with a very strong signal of, and that was significant at P of 0.03. Again, 0.05 is the cutoff for significance, 0.05 or lower. So the hazard reduction of 0.37. So yeah, you only had a 37% great chance of dying, as great a chance of dying as if when you're on ivermectin is not on ivermectin. So I guess we're going to have to cross ivermectin off the good doctor's list here as well because, hey, it works and it helps to limit COVID, that's for sure. Going down the list, remdesivir, okay, we'll give him that one. It doesn't really seem to work all that well, and so I'll give him a green check on that one. It doesn't really prevent COVID. It doesn't actually work all that well. It sort of works, but it's not. The signal isn't nearly as strong as the other things we're looking at. Vitamin C, next on the list. How about if we go there? Oh, hey, yeah, here was a really interesting case study. If you want to read a whole case study, just came out on August 10th. Unusual IV high-dose vitamin C success story in COVID-19. Remarkable improvement clinically and on the chest x-ray, and this was for a woman in her 70s. Just Hail Mary, got to try something. She's crashing, and it was a high-dose vitamin C turned her situation around. So it did work, and then it was all the way back here in March, right, where we were hearing about New York hospitals are treating coronavirus patients with vitamin C. And the quote that I pulled out of this article was, the patients who received vitamin C did significantly better than those who did not get vitamin C, significantly different. It helps because it helps a tremendous amount, but it is not highlighted because it's not a sexy drug. It's pretty sexy. Vitamin C is pretty sexy. It's a vitamin, but it's not a patentable drug. So yeah, you're absolutely right. At any rate, the hospitals were widely using vitamin C as a coronavirus treatment. Why? Because it worked. So I think we're going to have to put a big red line through vitamin C on the doctor's good list. Actemra. All right, let's go to Actemra. This is actually a patented medicine. And the problem was, what is it? It's a monoclonal antibody. And we've talked about this one. It seemed to have pretty good signal in some early studies that came out, but then all of the phase 3 stuff, when they put it in big trials, it failed to meet phase 3 goals in COVID-19. Didn't really work, disappointing results. It was promising at one point, but it fell short in the Italian study in early stage. Anyway, it didn't work out. So you know what? I'm going to have to give the good doctor that one. Actemra doesn't work. Aspirin, I don't even know why that's on the list. I just got a question mark. Maybe as a blood thinner it could have some role, but okay. Don't know what to make of that one. Plasma. So this is plasma therapy where you take blood from somebody who's already had COVID. They have high circulating antibodies. Hopefully you test for that. They're not one of the patients who doesn't have antibodies. You take the red blood cells out, you're left with the plasma. It has all the circulating antibodies in it. You give that plasma to a patient, and hey, guess what? We have all these large studies now that are suggesting that what is called convalescent plasma can help treat COVID-19. And then, of course, but experts have doubts. I wonder if these are pharma experts, because, again, this is not a patentable sort of thing that pharma can get their hands on. Infusing hospitalized COVID-19 patients with blood plasma from people who had recovered from the disease appeared to show a benefit in a nationwide study, but the study's lack of a placebo group left several experts struggling to interpret the data. Okay. The study enrolled more than 35,000 patients. Holy crap, that's huge. Found that quickly administering so-called convalescent plasma had a marked effect on mortality for patients with severe cases of COVID-19. Oh, don't wait for severe, but I guess if you have to. Those who received transfusions within 3 days of a diagnosis had a 7-day death rate of 8.7%, while patients who got plasma after 4 or more days had a mortality rate of 11.9%. The difference met the standard for statistical significance. And they say, but without a placebo group for comparison, it's unclear just how valuable the treatment might be. All right. I still think that's a reasonable signal there. But can I just point something out? So when they want to, they set up the studies to succeed. And when they want to, they point out the critical difference here. So notice here what they did for plasma therapy. They're like, those who receive transfusions within 3 days versus 4 days, right? So obviously they're saying, wow, time matters in this, and the earlier you can give this, the better the signal. Obviously, we want to stack the deck in the favor of the patient. So they obviously ran this with time involved, and I'm sure they set it up to administer it as quickly as they possibly could. Which is good. I'm fine with that. But why aren't they doing that with hydroxychloroquine? And why would they do it with plasma? Well, think about this, though. Plasma is something that has to be administered in a hospital setting. Plasma is something you're in a bed, you're chewing up resources. Lots of people are making money administering it, tracking you, withdrawing it, manufacturing the plasma. There's a whole chain of people who have a very vested interest in this thing, and so it gets favorable treatment. This is the only conclusion I can come to at this point in time, is that the healthcare system is really designed to extract money from people more than it's designed to cure and heal people. And I'm not. That's the system. I'm not putting any particular blame on any individual out there, but I am saying that it seems remarkable to me that something that can be delivered easily and cheaply in an outpatient setting without even necessarily even requiring much input at all from the medical system or doctors or anybody, like ivermectin or like hydroxychloroquine. Oh, boy, they get rough rides, and there's no money for studies, and then they do set up studies, but oh my gosh, they're designed to fail. And then when they do fail, nobody ever mentions, oh, we gave it to these patients really late and without zinc, right? They never do that, right? They just tell you it didn't work. And then you have to read these giant long articles and dig through and find the table that ultimately says, oh yeah, we gave this to these people within 14 days of symptom onset, and then go, oh yeah, that's stupid, right? So at any rate, this is just to contrast for you how certain things get favorable treatment, and of course the relevant data is presented to you as it is here. It was relevant whether they got it within 3 days or 4 days. Why? Because time matters. Time really matters in this story. Of course it does. Time counts. So why doesn't it ever seem to be a factor when they're trying to describe hydroxychloroquine studies that failed, quote unquote. All right, so plasma therapy works. Bleach, I'm going to give him bleach, check mark on that, because what the heck, why is bleach even on here on this list? Of course, we all know why. It's because Trump said something that was interpreted to be bleach, and then next thing you know, if you believe in hydroxychloroquine, you must also believe in drinking bleach. I mean, that's the level of silliness we're down to. And then zinc, I put a red line through zinc. Why? Because as we all know, zinc is an important component of both the ivermectin studies as well as the hydroxychloroquine studies. And even if you weren't taking those two things, having zinc in your system, a good idea, because it seems to be generally useful as a supplement that might be a immunity booster. Okay, all right. So at any rate, as we go down that, I'm just, here we are at the end of this whole thing. It was as useless to fight against the interpretations of ignorance as to whip the fog. Well, I'm going to just whip the fog here, or do what I do, which is to continue to fight against the interpretations of ignorance. Because this is an ignorant list to throw all these things together. To throw bleach in there with ivermectin and zithromax and blood thinners and immunity boosters is just, that's not helpful. So what do you do when you want to whip the fog? I don't know. I guess you get one of these. I don't know. All right, here we are today. Conclusions and summaries for August 28th. First, there's a lot of highly misleading information coming from doctors and the so-called medical establishment. I'm really losing my respect for a bunch of people in this. It's a disturbing amount, right? You get stuff like this here, right? So what am I convinced of? I'm convinced that the science supports that hydroxychloroquine plus azithromycin and zinc. I'm convinced it supports that if and when it's given early, right? I'm convinced as well that giving hydroxychloroquine with or without azithromycin and zinc is useless if given late. Maybe even harmful. Absolutely harmful if you give it to very sick people in toxic amounts. Are you listening, recovery trial doctors? Oh my God, I don't know what y'all have something to answer for. No question about that, you doctors who set that up. I'm also convinced here that ivermectin looks especially promising based on the early data. I think it maybe even looks more promising than hydroxychloroquine, but it does look pretty good at this point. I'm waiting for more data to come out. I hope the studies are done well. I hope they're done right. I hope they're not done by people who set them up to fail or whatever the stories are, right? I'm also convinced that vitamins D and C have strong roles to play in limiting the worst of COVID-19. I've been very clear about people getting vitamin D in their system as an immunity booster or something that you need because the science says that's something that we should all understand, right? The science says that your blood serum level of vitamin D makes a big difference in COVID outcome. That Israeli study was more recent. I presented earlier data that came out of India that showed that same blood level association of the disease severity of COVID and vitamin D levels. I can't remember when. April? February? March? I can't remember. It was back there sometime. Right. I'm convinced that new pharma products get favorable treatment and are given every possible advantage in trials. And I'm equally convinced that off-patent medicines are given rough treatment, if not set up to fail. This is a great failing of our overall system. It has nothing to do with health, healthcare, compassion, humanity, being humane. None of that. It has everything to do with money. Really a grubby level of money and influence and power. Just awful, awful stuff. Nothing to do with what you or I as compassionate people would understand, but it's the system and seems to attract a certain type. And it's my opinion that everybody involved who would sacrifice lives and people's health to make either a political point or a buck is morally compromised at best. That's the kindest I can be in this story. All right. It really didn't have to be this way. And we deserve better. How could it have been better than this? If our press was on the job, if they were taking dispassionate roles, if they were checking their political affiliations at the door either direction, if they understood the role of pharma money in swaying and shaping opinion, and if they understood the difference between a well-designed trial and a poorly designed trial, all of those things are easily accomplished, I think, by somebody who's diligent and really cares. All right, in closing, same stuff as always. This is my personal immune system. What is going on with this thing? Let me just drag this back over real quick. And I don't know why this is gone all the way over there. Let me put it back in frame. All right. Yeah, so zinc, how does zinc get into your cells? Quercetin helps the zinc get into your cells. So that's what I do is I take both zinc and quercetin. And vitamin D3, not medical advice, of course, not even any sort of advice at all. I take 5,000 units a day, one little gel cap a day, and that's what I've chosen to do. Make sure you've got, if you're short on anything else in your diet, because a lot of foods now today are short on all sorts of micronutrients and magnesium, manganese, selenium, you name it, simply because the foods we grow are grown in soils that are now deficient in all those things. So there's a whole story there. It's very interesting. It's fascinating about how much more nutrient-dense foods used to be 40, 50 years ago compared to today, for that one simple reason that we put the big macros back on the field, the macros, NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. We put those back on because at least you can get healthy-looking plants that are green, but if you took those plants apart, blended them, ran a study on them, asked, what are the micronutrients that are in there, copper, boron, magnesium, selenium, all that stuff, you would find that over time, those things have just plunged, right? And those are all things that we need in our diet. Why? Dietitians in Canada, that's not a trick question. Maybe you should go study that. We need those things because our immune system is a very complex system, and having that work well requires a lot of key inputs into the overall system. So that would be all those things we get from the diet. All right, that's it for today. By the way, don't forget, get a t-shirt and join a movement if you want. So these are the resilience t-shirts that we sell out of Peak Prosperity. No, this is not a huge moneymaker for us. It's just something we really love doing, is helping everybody identify each other out in public, and it really warms my heart to see all these great pictures of people out there in their gardens having fun, smiling, and being resilient. All right, that's all I've got for you today. Have a great weekend. Next time we talk, looks like it's going to be September. Yeah, we're already there. See you then. See you on Tuesday, sometime in early September. That's all. Again, have a great weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.
Hi, folks. This is Adam Taggart, Chris's co-founder at Peak Prosperity. To get your own Resilience shirt, simply go to peakprosperity.com/shirts. Each shirt is made of 100% organic cotton and produced in the USA. And when your shirt arrives, please send us a photo of you wearing it if you feel comfortable doing so. We'll add you to our wall of proud Peak Prosperity members who are showing the world that resilience is the way to a better future. Thanks for watching.